Okay, I figured out how to do my mic without having to hold it. I'm just using a paper clip. Hopefully it still sounds good. My name is Ryan Hill of Hill House Productions. Today I'm going to be ranking the Terminator franchise. Now before I get started, I would like to state for the record that I don't hate any of these movies. When I marathon them, there aren't any I dread having to sit through, which is nice. Most of my rankings have a couple controversial choices. This one's no exception. My number 6 is Terminator Salvation. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this movie, but I do at least enjoy it because there is quite a bit to like here. First off, the acting is pretty solid across the board. Sam Worthington gives one of his better performances.
I know you. I heard your voice on the radio. You're John Connor. Of course you know me.
Anton Yelchin is great as young Kyle Reese.
Come with me if you want to live.
Personally, as much as I love Christian Bale, I don't think he was the best fit for John Connor, but he does a pretty good job.
You and me. We've been at war. Since before either of us even existed. You tried killing my mother, Sarah Connor. You killed my father, Kyle Reese. You will not kill me.
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you?
And finally, Bryce Dallas Howard is probably the weakest link in the cast, but even she's pretty good. I appreciate that this movie deviated from the established formula of the franchise. I like that it tried to do something different by being a war movie that also has Terminators in it. I like that. And one thing that I like that this movie didn't do that some other movies in this franchise did is try to have a villain that one-ups the T-1000. This takes place during the war against the machines before time travel is invented in this timeline. So we got to see some older Terminators, and that was cool. I like the variety. Obviously, the giant harvester bot is my favorite. I also like that we got to see the T-600, as well as the Moto Terminators, Hunter Killers, or HKs. Like, specifically the flying ones. We had to see more of those. That was cool. And I really like the action in this movie. McG isn't a great director, but he does know how to shoot action. I'll give him that much. This movie has a lot of really good action. And finally, I do like some of the fan service we got in this movie. We get to see Marcus teach Kyle that shotgun disarming move he taught Sarah in the first Terminator. We get to see how John got the scars on his face. That was cool. Now, I mentioned that I like that this movie did something different, but there is also a downside to that. This movie doesn't really feel like a Terminator movie. It feels like it started out as a war movie, and then they made it a Terminator movie when they were writing like the second or third draft of the script. And then there's C.G. Arnold. What the hell were they thinking? I like that they made the final boss, the first T-800, to be completed, but why did they have to digitally recreate young Arnold? During the fight, the skin gets burned off and it leaves just the endoskeleton. So why couldn't they just have the endoskeleton? Or why couldn't they get a different actor to play a T-800 and just establish that not all T-800s look like Arnold? There are some that look like him and some that are different. I'm pretty sure that's true anyway. I don't remember for sure. Also, while I do like the action in this movie, it kind of feels watered down because of the PG-13 rating, especially during the final battle between John and the T-800. Seriously, go rewatch that. He should have broken several bones during that fight, and in an R-rated movie, he might have. In PG-13, there's no chance. Another big problem I have with this movie is that there are quite a few noticeable gaps in logic. This movie leaves a lot of important questions unanswered, and some of them could even be considered plot holes. Probably the biggest offender is Skynet's big plan to get John. They let it slip that Kyle Reese is their number one target, which gets John out on the hunt for him. They use Marcus to get Kyle, so they can capture him and use him as bait to lure John in. Also, they make Marcus a cyborg, but they don't control him at all. They just send him out there, either just hoping that he'll follow the plan, despite not knowing the plan, or just Skynet is a completely omniscient being and knows this Marcus will do it, which is bullshit. I don't know, they leave too much up to chance. And when they finally do get Kyle Reese, why don't they just kill him? They know he's a threat, which makes no sense, but I'll get to that in a minute here. They know he's a threat. so it makes no sense not to kill him. Now, it wouldn't help them get rid of this timeline's John Connor, but if they know Kyle Reese is important, then they know why. Meaning they know about the time travel, which again makes no sense, but I'll get to that in a minute. And killing him would prevent him from going back in time and getting Sarah pregnant in the first place. Then there's the signal. Skynet puts out a signal knowing the Resistance will think that Skynet didn't want them to find it and realize, hey, we can use this signal to kill Terminators. If they can do that, if they can put out data that lets the Resistance know Kyle Reese is their target, why not just put out data suggesting they've already captured Kyle to lure John Connor in that way? Save them some time. But this raises an even bigger question. How the fuck does Skynet even know about Kyle Reese in the first place? When Marcus ends up back at Skynet HQ, Helena Bonham Carter is telling him, "You succeeded where Skynet has failed time and time again. You've killed John Connor." How the hell do they know about that? This movie takes place like 10 years before time travel tech even exists. So how do they know they've sent Terminators back on multiple occasions and each one has failed? It's annoying. There's also one kind of stupid character moment when John is fighting a T-600 and he gets him on the ground and he pulls out his pistol and shoots it several times in the head. I realize survival instincts are a powerful thing, but John should know better than anyone that doing that move is more likely to kill himself with a ricochet than it is to kill the T-600. My last big problem with this movie isn't even the movie's fault, it's the marketing team's fault. And half of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Remember how earlier I mentioned that Marcus is a cyborg? Did you notice how I didn't say spoiler alert? It's because I don't have to. Anyone who saw the trailers to this movie in 2008 and 2009 already knows that because they spoiled it.
This thing is something we've never seen before.
My name is Marcus Wright.
You think you're human?
I am human.
What are you?
I don't know.
In this movie, it's set up as a big reveal, and if you don't know going in, it's a pretty good reveal. But they put that scene in the trailer, that shot of him hung up with his chest cut open to reveal the metallic ribs. That shot is in the trailer. Ugh. Anyway, so my verdict is that this movie is a decent war movie, held back by some gaps in logic and a terrible CG Arnold Schwarzenegger, among other things. But it's decent enough. My rating for this one is 2.5 out of 5. My number 5 is the one I'm pretty sure most people have at the bottom. Terminator Genisys. First off, I love that we finally get to see the Resistance attack on Skynet, leading up to John Connor sending Kyle Reese back in time.
No!
It's a great action sequence, one of the best in the movie. And speaking of which, I really like all the action in this movie. It's not the best, but it's really good. Old Arnie versus young Arnie is pretty cool. And unlike in Salvation, CG young Arnie actually looks good. The fight against the new T-1000 is pretty cool. Helicopter chase is pretty cool. And the final battle is a lot of fun. Like Salvation, I appreciate that this movie broke the mold and tried to do something different. After Kyle Reese goes back in time, they do a really good job recreating some scenes from the original and then taking them in a new direction.
You're human. Hey, you gotta let me go.
Face down, hands on your back, or I will shoot.
Listen to me. Oh.
By the way, you're filling out the paperwork on this.
Gerber! O'Brien, officer down. We need backup. It's a robot. We're screwed, aren't we?
Pretty much.
Come with me if you want to live.
And young Arnold walking up to the punks and saying,
Your clothes. Give them to me. Now.
and then old Arnold shows up.
You won't be needing any clothes.
and then they fight. That was cool. I also like some of the ballsy choices this movie made. Making John Connor actually, I don't have to be sorry. I'll get to that. Making John Connor the villain was a risky move, and personally, I think it worked for this movie. It worked pretty well.
What are you doing?
John!
And personally, I prefer Jason Clarke over Christian Bale as John Connor, but that's just me. But Clarke is even better as the T-3000 than he is as John Connor.
That hurt.
And for the record, I only know it's called the T-3000 because I looked it up. The movie never calls it that. There is one mixed aspect in this movie, and that's the acting. Jason Clarke...
Yet here we stand! On the precipice of the final battle!
And J.K. Simmons...
Why are they always trying to kill you? I want to help you. I do, I think. But I gotta understand. I know what's going on here has to be really, really complicated.
We're here to stop the end of the world.
I can work with that.
Both give solid performances. Arnold is once again perfect as the T-800, and I like that this movie does something different with him, although personally I think this is his weakest performance in the franchise, but that's just me. Lee Byung-hun, I hope I pronounced that right, he makes a really good T-1000. And Matt Smith only has a quick cameo, but he makes the most of it. On the other hand, the weakest performances in this movie are, unfortunately, the two leads. Jai Courtney is a pretty good actor. There is a reason. The only thing I've ever seen him in that I actually love him in was Captain Boomerang in Suicide Squad.
Sorry. That's what I do.
But no, when he has to use an American accent, he loses all of his charisma, and this movie is no exception.
How'd you know which one was him?
Emilia Clarke, who I love in Game of Thrones. She is one of the best parts of Game of Thrones. Her performance is slightly better than Jai Courtney, but because she is a much better actor than him, her subpar acting is actually much more disappointing than his.
Well, I didn't know exactly.
The story of Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor is a love story, and these two do not convince me that they're falling in love by the end of this movie. It's as simple as that. And like Salvation, Genesis has some gaps in logic. John Connor bot is made up of nanobots. There's a scene where he turns into like a cloud of nanobots and flies down to attack the heroes who are driving across the Golden Gate Bridge in a school bus they stole. He turns into a cloud of nanobots and flies down after them. Question. If he can do that, why does he ever bother walking anywhere? Unless it's to sneak in. Why not just do that as much as possible? It would be so much more efficient. And finally, like Salvation, Terminator Genesis has a big moment where it's revealed that one of the heroes is actually a machine. And like Salvation, they spoiled it in the trailers.
What are you doing?
John!
What have they done to my son?
Ugh. That was in the trailers. I remember seeing that in the trailers and thinking, ooh, John Connor's a Terminator. Wait a minute, I don't think I'm supposed to know that. And honestly, I'm pretty sure this is why the trailers for Dark Fate were kinda underwhelming. They were playing it safe because they didn't want to spoil anything. My verdict is that this is a decent enough movie. It's enjoyable if you go in with low expectations. But you should go in with low expectations. I give this one a 2.6 out of 5. Alright, moving on up. My number 4 is Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. Prior to Dark Fate, this was hands down the most underrated movie in the franchise. Starting off with the good stuff, unlike Salvation and Genesis, T3 actually has an R rating, which mainly just helps the action feel more raw and intense, which is good. And it also helps that most of the effects in this movie are practical. I don't know if this is a popular opinion or not. I like the humor in this movie, at least most of it. Mainly it's just like, talk to the hand, and then the bit where the T-850 uses basic psychology on John.
Look at me. I'm no leader. I never was. I'm never gonna.
You're right. You're not the one I want. I'm wasting my time.
Fuck you. You fucking machine.
Better.
Oh, you were just digging with me?
Anger is more useful than despair.
What?
Basic psychology is among my subroutines.
I don't know, I thought that was pretty funny. And speaking of which, Arnold Schwarzenegger is once again the perfect actor to play an emotionless killing machine. I also really like Claire Danes as Catherine Brewster.
Out of my way!
My mission is to protect you.
That's enough. Move or I'll do it. I swear I will. I'll shoot you.
Go ahead, see what happens.
Don't do that.
Oh my God.
She probably gives the best performance in the movie. And finally, spoiler alert, I fucking love this movie's ending. John and Catherine get where they're going, and they find out that Catherine's father sent them not somewhere to stop Judgment Day, but somewhere to survive it.
Why didn't he tell us? Why did he lead us down here? To live. That was his mission.
And then Judgment Day actually happens. They lose. I love that. That's awesome. Moving on to the bad side of things. First and foremost is Nick Stahl giving us hands down the worst portrayal of John Connor. And the part is written fairly well, meaning it's all his fault. Now, to be fair, he is at least trying. He's just not succeeding at all. He's pretty bad throughout the movie.
I never even knew where she was buried. I hit the road the day she died.
My second big problem with this movie is the villain. On paper, the TX is a great idea, and Kristanna Loken's performance is at least passable. Again, she's playing an emotionless killing machine, and she plays that pretty well. But ultimately, what ruins the Terminatrix is the design. The liquid metal of the T-1000 is part of what makes it such a great villain. The TX is meant to be a step up from that. It is an anti-Terminator Terminator, and yet it has a metal endoskeleton inside, but the metal endoskeleton is attached to the liquid metal. They are not separate, they are one. They are combined, they are one thing. And because of that, the endoskeleton ultimately makes it easier to kill. Stupid design. And yeah, it has onboard weapons, but I'm pretty sure the T-1000 could still kick its ass any day. And finally, this movie is basically a beat-for-beat rehash of T2. It doesn't bug me as much as it seems to bug a lot of people, but it does bug me a little bit. My verdict is that Terminator 3 is neither good enough to be great, nor bad enough to suck. I am giving it a 3 out of 5. Moving right along, my number 3 is Terminator Dark Fate, and I am issuing a spoiler alert right off the bat. Basically every element of this movie is the best in the franchise since T2, and there are some things that are even better. There are some things this movie does better than T1 and T2. Besides Linda Hamilton, this movie also marked the return of something else the franchise has been missing since 1991. Horror. If you think about it, the original Terminator is a slasher movie. More on that later. And T2 is essentially the Aliens of the franchise. Dark Fate is the Halloween 2018 of the franchise, wiping most of the slate clean, bringing back the original Final Girl, and returning the franchise to its former terrifying glory. Linda Hamilton is back, and she is having a blast.
Because I was her.
Sarah!
I can see you're very upset.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
I'll be back.
Sarah Connor feels just as real and relatable now as she did almost 30 years ago, and she perfectly balances badassery and vulnerability.
My name is Sarah Connor. When I was about her age, a Terminator was sent to kill me, to stop the birth of my son, John, leader of the Resistance. We changed the future, saved 3 billion lives. You're welcome.
Arnold's back too, and he, in my opinion, he gives his best performance as the T-800 in this movie. I also like that they took his character in a different direction. I'll talk a little more about that later. Natalia Reyes and Mackenzie Davis both give great performances, probably the best in the movie.
I am human. Just enhanced. You know, increased speed and strength, which means I can rip your throat out if you piss me off, so don't.
Their characters are extremely well written, and they feel very real and natural. And finally, Gabriel Luna's Rev 9 succeeds where the TX and the T3000 failed. It actually feels like a sensible upgrade to the T1000 because, like the TX, it has the T800 style endoskeleton and the T1000 style liquid metal. But unlike the Terminatrix, they are two separate units. They are not combined. They are not joined. They are separate units that sometimes operate as one, which makes it an even bigger threat than the T-1000. The action is well shot, well edited, well choreographed. There's one action scene that I wasn't a huge fan of, but I'll get to that later. There are some action scenes in this movie that are the best in the entire franchise, in my opinion. Better than anything in T1 or T2. The planes. That was badass. The warehouse fight. The initial car chase where finally someone shoots out the tires and we get to see them struggling to drive with one tire missing, skidding around on the wheel. And the final battle, just first of all, some of the best sound design I've ever heard is in the final battle when Grace is just whipping that shit. Phenomenal sound design right there. And that whole final battle is just, like the best action scene in the entire franchise, probably. Tim Miller's directing and Ken Seng's cinematography have both improved since Deadpool. And Junkie XL's musical score is surprisingly great. It sometimes channels the iconic scores from T1 and T2, but it mostly just does its own thing, so I appreciate that. This is where spoilers come in, by the way. I also appreciate that this movie has a new apocalypse.
You may have changed the future, but you didn't change our fate.
Sarah and John won. They completed their mission. They beat Skynet. And because humanity is terrible, we have once again fucked ourselves over with Legion, a program that was originally designed for cyber warfare that, like Skynet, became self-aware and tried to kill everyone. I love that this movie answers some questions that none of the previous movies have, and also just fills in a couple holes. Why does Skynet only send back one Terminator at a time? Well, in this movie, it's revealed that in T2, Skynet sent a T-800 back as an insurance policy in addition to the T-1000 to kill John Connor if the T-1000 failed, and it succeeded. Yeah, this movie kills John Connor, and then the T-800 just walks back into the sea from whence it came. It's a great opening. I love it so much. It also finally answers the question, okay, so let's say a Terminator completes its mission. Then what happened? This movie answers that question. I love what they did with the T-800 in this movie.
So you're Carl?
That's what everyone calls me, yes.
I'm never gonna fucking call you Carl.
So what they did with Carl, the T-800, is that now he found a woman who, I think she was being sexually assaulted, and he protected her, and he is her protector. He completed his purpose, so he went out to find purpose, and he found a purpose. And I love that they actually explain how this woman and her son haven't noticed he's Terminator. When Sarah asked him, she hasn't noticed that you weigh 400 pounds? Our relationship is not physical. First of all, thank you for that. I do not need that image in my head. But second of all, thank you for not just lampshading it or just ignoring it. Thank you for acknowledging that, yeah, that wouldn't make sense, but here's an explanation that does make sense. And he is, what is he? I think he does like tiles, like flooring or something like that. There's great humor when they're waiting for Sarah's contact to show up and he's talking to Danny about his business and colors and all that, and like what color, you have to figure out what color goes good with the rest of the room, and oh my god, it's so great. Building off of that, I also think that this movie has the best humor in the franchise. Another great bit of humor is when Sarah pulls her... Sarah has her phone in an empty potato chip bag, and she explains it as, oh, it's so that the government can't track it. Okay, but why do you have like 10 of them? Because I really like potato chips. I love that. I really only have 2 negatives with this movie. First off, like T3, it is kind of a retread of T2, although it does at least do some things differently, so that kind of makes up for it in my opinion. And second, there's like one action scene, thankfully it's brief, where they're driving a Humvee underwater. It's really dark, it's hard to tell what's going on, and it's kind of confusing. But yeah, it wasn't that bad. So my verdict on this one, the plot is nothing new for the most part, but everything else about it is great, and there are parts of it that are the best in the franchise. I give Dark Fate a 4 out of 5. Now we're down to the 2 that everyone disagrees on, but it's really an easy decision for me. My number 2 is The Terminator. This is one of the greatest slasher movies of all time, and you have a virtually unstoppable killer hunting down a female protagonist and killing anyone in its path. This movie has it all. Great action. Great suspense. Great music. Almost everything in this movie is great, but there is one thing it does well that none of the other movies in this franchise do, and that is the love story. None of the other movies that try to do this succeed. Michael Biehn and Linda Hamilton have phenomenal chemistry.
Are you saying it's from the future?
One possible future. From your point of view, I don't know tech stuff.
They give great performances.
Oh, this is gonna make me puke. Would you just talk about something?
What?
And the romance feels real.
Was there someone special?
Someone.
A girl, you know.
No. Never.
Never. I'm sorry.
My one and only problem with this movie is that, due to the low budget, some of the practical effects look fake as shit. That's about it. Ultimately, I think this movie easily overcomes its low budget, and it earns its status as a classic. Finally, my number one is Terminator 2: Judgment Day. This is legitimately one of the best movies of all time. The action is fantastic. The acting is great.
Call to John now.
The villain is iconic and terrifying. The musical score is legendary. I only have two small problems with this movie. First, there is a continuity error when the T-1000 chopper rams the hero's van, and when it hits the van, the nose crumples. But then the next shot, the damage isn't nearly as bad. And second, I forgot to mention this earlier, but Salvation was not the last time this franchise gave away spoilers in the trailer. It wasn't the first time either. All the way back in 1990 and 1991, this movie did it first. This movie's trailers spoiled a huge reveal. Not that there were two Terminators, that was their marketing gimmick.
This time, there are two. Terminator 2.
That was their gimmick, that wasn't a big reveal. No, what they spoiled was the fact that Arnold is the good guy this time around.
Same make, same model, new mission. Once, he was programmed to destroy the future. Now, his mission...
Get down!
...is to protect it.
Come with me if you want to live.
The entire opening bit of this movie, probably the first 10-15 minutes or so, do an outstanding job of keeping it ambiguous. It's not until Arnold says,
"Get down,"
that we realize that he is not the villain. He is the hero, and it is legitimately one of the greatest reveals of all time. Unless, of course, you saw the trailers back in 1990 and 1991, in which case you had it spoiled for you. I will never understand why they do that. Thankfully, it does nothing to lessen this movie's impact. The CGI in this movie is better than most modern CGI. This movie is 29 years old. 29 years old! What the fuck happened to CGI? Especially in the early 2000s. Like, watch any movie from the early 2000s, guarantee, with a few exceptions, for the most part, the CGI is ass. You weren't involved! Anyway, beyond that, the dialogue, there are so many iconic lines. Terminator 2: Judgment Day is one of the best sci-fi movies, action movies, and just generally one of the greatest movies of all time. It is a true masterpiece, and I give it 5 out of 5.